This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
It's been awfully busy, Ben. Really just cut this segment.
But surely Shawn has like the perfect Halloweeny setup. Where are your trick-or-treaters?
If you hear any screams, that is completely coincidental.
Hello, chat. How's it going?
Let me pull my beard out of my mouth.
Yeah.
This news has made Ben mean.
What happens if you get stabbed and then you wake up?
Imagine this. Yeah, imagine a world.
Excited is such a strong word.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 podcast on the continent, from Nilfgaard up to somewhere north of Nilfgaard, Redania, there you go. They all listen to the Eldritch Lorecast. And that is my official audition while they're casting Australians on Netflix series. My name is Ben Byrne. I'm here with Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, Shawn Merwin. Shawn, what are you dressed as for Halloween, if it's not pretty self-explanatory?
I just didn't shave for the last couple days. Is it okay?
Yeah, you look great. Yeah.
Can barely notice it. Yeah.
How I feel on the inside most of the time. I'm just dressing for the job that I want.
Right.
It's an
great.
outward expression of your inner emotions.
Exactly.
Dael Kingsmill, welcome to the podcast as ever. What is it that you have dressed as this Halloween?
I'm gonna stand up and see if I can kick my feet high enough to show you my gumboots.
Oh, you've gone full.
Oh no, I was plugged in. But yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Gumboots and all.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it.
That specific moment, excellent for radio as well. James Hake, please avail us of your amazing costume. Who are you dressed as this Halloween?
This Halloween, I'm Marth, Prince of Altia. I'm at your service. And as friends, you are irreplaceable.
And I have dressed as Liam Hemsworth as Geralt of Rivia.
Oh boy.
We'll crack into that in a moment, speaking of horrifying things. But #1 on the docket this week, not Halloween, we've got a little bit of news to quickly crack into. Dragonlance preview has hit D&D Beyond, I think, in the last week, which is a couple of articles showing off the Lunar Sorcerer, or at least part of the Lunar Sorcerer, and how its magic is associated with the shifting cycles of the moon. And we also have the evolving background feats, things that are tied to the Knights of the Order of Salmonella, I'm going to say from now on to make all the Dragonlance fans angry. Has anybody had a chance to look at these? Have they changed from the Unearthed Arcana to anybody's impression?
It's been awfully busy, Ben. Really just cut this segment.
Yeah, okay,
just abort now.
That moon sorcerer was that's Halloweeny. That's
there you go.
Thematic.
There you go.
Which has the phases of the moon. I remember talking about this on the podcast.
Yeah. I don't
wonder
think
if it's become less complicated now, because I didn't read it. I'll be honest with you. It's not less complicated.
Nah, not by the looks of it. In fact, like the article explicitly says something to the effect of this subclass is for players who like complexity and versatility is the word I'm looking for in their play style. Because you get like 20 spells or something at level 1 in addition to your normal sorcerer spells.
I was starting to wonder, is Dragonlance a setting for people who really like that granular level of like, I don't even want to call it crunch, but like control over your character and what's going on? And
I listened to the D&D Beyond interview with
Jeremy Crawford.
Jeremy Crawford, thank you. Jeremy.
I'm giving him a new name. His new name is
Jeremy Jawford.
Chronicle Baseball Bat.
He talked about from what they had done previously to this and how it didn't really rely on phases of the moon anymore, which I think we all agree was a good thing, as we don't want the DM to have to track what exact phase of the moon that it is.
Like, it was a cool idea.
Yeah, it was. And but I think it's still very complicated. from what I've seen of it. So there are players out there that like complicated and like that sort of thing. So we'll see how it plays. I'm surprised they didn't release it as a full playtest packet though.
Well, because they're releasing it, I think, in advance of the book. So the book is on its way. So it's just kind of, and again, we've talked D&D's digital direction to death over the last 10 episodes of this podcast. But it's just interesting that they're, starting to sneak things out of the door a little bit ahead of the book actually releasing. To be fair, I don't think it's I don't think you can play the class just off these articles that they've released. So they're still holding it back for the official release. But, continuing to just sort of provide bonuses to people where they can if you are logged in or signed into D&D Beyond.
I do wonder, from a design perspective, if there's merit in shifting the tracking of the moon phases from a DM responsibility over to a player responsibility. Well, here's a hypothetical version of the Moon Sorcerer, right? When your campaign begins, at first level, when you choose the subclass, roll a D something, determine the phase of the moon. And every time you take a long rest, or every time, a new day happens, move this track up by 1. When you get to the end of the track, swap it over back to the beginning. That tracks the phases of the moon.
You can make the track a circle.
Yeah, make the track a circle. Ooh, very moon-like.
Thank you.
The only problem that arises there, I guess, is that if the DM wants to do something funky with the moon, they need to make sure that the player and the DM kind of have an established moon synchronicity going on. But how many DMs are doing something with the moon?
Yeah. I mean, I think they've really... I like that idea.
One significant DM is doing something with the moon right now.
Yeah, well, did I write an adventure all about that moon? I mean, well, we can debate the merits of that moon. Actually, that whole moon, the adventure and Critical Role, we're talking about Ruidus, the smaller red moon of Exandria in Critical Role Campaign 3 and Call of the
For those who don't watch, there are 2 moons in Critical Role.
There's 2 moons in Critical Role. Don't worry, the cast didn't know that until after 120 episodes. So there's a second moon. And it's full of weird magic, and it's very evil and sort of sinister. But one of the things about it is that its phases don't sync up with the other moon. And that is scientifically extremely inaccurate. Moons, should there be multiple satellites, should have the same phases. But some weird magic goes on with this moon. So its phases are kind of all out of sync. And sometimes it just randomly flashes full when magical nonsense is happening. And if you've got a moon with magic associated with it, magic enough for a sorcerer to be drawing from it, I think the DM should be able to pull something like, yeah, the moon is suddenly full right now. There's something wild going on here. It's throwing all your powers out of sync. The tides are all screwed up. And also, I don't have to be on the same track as your moon tracking shenanigans.
Take that.
Take that.
Did my eyes deceive me? Last night I was on D&D Beyond, and I saw that they had a Halloween list of our spookiest adventures. They're all on sale. You can get Curse of Strahd, whatever. But I thought that I saw the pre-order for Dragonlance on that list. Is Dragonlance creepy and I just didn't know it?
Yeah, dragons are spooky. Spooky dragons are gonna come in. I don't know.
Spooky.
I mean, yeah, a fairly obvious kind of sales tactic, I suppose. Put the latest thing. Doesn't matter what it is. Dragonlance could be a Christmas, adventure if it was coming out around then.
Cosmic Postman says no clerics is spooky.
There you go.
Good point.
That is spooky.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't know there was no clerics in Dragonlance, but what was interesting about the feats and backgrounds is that they had prerequisites. A prerequisite, I think, is going to be promptly ignored by any and all players and GMs, but I was interested because I'd never seen this before, which was prerequisite must be playing a Dragonlance campaign. Which seems like, I don't even know why they put that on there. I don't think that's going to stick.
No, but I kind of love it.
Because
then you can go real ham. You can make it really, really specifically themed.
I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'll say it again because I believe very strongly. I really dislike the way that D&D Beyond kind of throws everything in the bin. Like when you're making a character, you have some sliders to pick from, but I don't think anyone really pays attention to those. And so it means that when you're just making a character, all of a sudden you have all of these dragon marked houses floating around your background and your race options. And all of a sudden this homebrew world has got like dragon marked houses in it because the GM is like, well, I'll roll with this. And it's like, the lore is getting all sort of thrown in the soup. This is a mess. So if they do stuff like prerequisite must be doing Dragonlance, I can see that as a way to more kind of cleanly divide out where all the content goes.
Yeah, okay, you sold me. As someone who likes very specifically defined class and racial kind of inclusions in a campaign, because imagine if they had, like in D&D Beyond, a drop-down menu, maybe this is what you were mentioning before, where is your campaign set? And it's an optional menu that you can click or not click if you don't want to, but you hit Dragonlance and it filters out every non-Dragonlance kind of option for the campaign as you're going through character creation, or Forgotten Realms filters out all non-Forgotten Realms. I think that's a really cool idea, actually. Maybe that's the direction that they're going. And then, of course, they have the evolving feats via the backgrounds for the Knights of Salmonella and the Mages of Magocracy-ness. And I wonder if we're going to see more. Like, do we feel like this is going to be a Dragonlance only thing? Or they're almost testing the waters here for 1D&D. We've seen feats have become much more important in 1D&D. We've seen that they're leveling feats now, saying you can only choose this feat if you are X level. I can't remember off the top of my head if in the playtest they've already put some prerequisite feats that theoretically evolve off the one before it. But do we think that this could be indicative of something that's going to appear very strongly in 6th Ed 1D&D?
Everything that's designed is a playtest of what might come next. They're always looking at the numbers of how many people are playing what and doing surveys. So yes, it is. But I don't think it's as deliberate as you're implying, that they're sending up a test balloon or casting an augury, if you will. I think they're just doing this, and if it works, they may use it again. And if it doesn't, they'll do some tinkering and see what comes next.
Well, those articles are on D&D Beyond right now if you want to go and check out what Dragonlance has in store. Speaking of things that will be in stores, James Hake, imagine this. Yeah, imagine a world where you are running a game of D&D and you need a monster, but you also need a dice. And so you're like, I'm going to roll this dice, this D20, whenever I need to, but now I need it to be a monster. Ka-chow! It pops open and becomes the monster you need it to be. Bam! It's on the table. Could I sell you on an official Diceling toy?
Ka-chow?
Yeah, ka-chow. That's the sound that they make officially. It'll be written on the box.
Why, Ben, I love this idea. Where could I find such a licensed product?
Well, next year, I believe, you will be able to get your Diceling if you need a Beholder, Red Dragon, Black Dragon, or something else. That's not one of those things.
Owlbear.
Owlbear, thank you. A tie-in with Honor Among Thieves, it looks like, but not explicit or only a tie-in with Honor Among Thieves, as the Beholder is not merchandised to be tied in with the movie. So is there going to be a Beholder in that movie? Maybe, maybe not, who knows? Anyway, these are kind of cool. I don't know. I threw this in because I have been seeing it all over my Twitter feed. Every second post is someone posting or some advertisement about the Dicelings. Dael, are you excited for Dicelings?
Excited is such a strong word. No, but I don't I don't begrudge their existence. Here's what I like about them. It feels very 80s in terms of toy design, right?
Sure.
To go back to this complicated folding into something else quality that surely began with Transformers or something similar and then just got applied to a million things it didn't need to be. I've got a Spider-Man toy somewhere on my shelf that folds into a different shaped Spider-Man toy. You know what I mean? It's just why is this happening? And there's something very nostalgic in that, and very nostalgic in the designs they've done. I mean, it feels like a great tie-in for kids.
Dael, do you remember Bakugan?
I do remember Byakugan.
Because this feels very Bakugan to me. As a toy line with an associated and anime that's an ad for the toy.
Oh yeah.
Where a little thing turned into a monster. Yeah, many kids animes are. This is a sort of thing where, like, if I had a 3-year-old right now, if I was a dad and had a 3-year-old, this is the sort of toy I grew up with. This is the sort of toy I'd want to get for my kid. This feels very well timed for, like, the generational cycle. Yeah. And like it works. If I were a dad with a 3-year-old kid, I would absolutely buy this for my kid. Like, no question about it. And they're pretty cute.
Is Bakugan like Zoids?
Now Zoids I don't know. We're talking past each other.
Yeah. We're like on a real generational line there.
Yeah.
Well, Dael knows what Zoids are, so I don't feel too bad.
Yeah. Although Zoids, did have excellent tie-in merch. Those toys, premium.
I never had one.
The best of the best. You never had one?
I never had a Zoid.
Oh. I thought I only had a couple until I went back and looked, and I went, oh no, I had a large collection. I say I had like 3. My brother had a large collection that I also laid claim to.
That's fair. The thing about these I find amusing more than anything is, I think last week or the week before we quickly touched on Wizards and Hasbro are really going to play on the D&D name to get that brand to make money for them. Somebody I mentioned, the Dicelings too, said, yeah, this feels like a very Hasbro product specifically. Mm-hmm. But I just love the fact that Dungeons and Dragons as a property, as an IP, is like a game first and a fantasy world second. Like, these are not like just a dragon toy or a beholder toy marketed as D&D. They're D20s that pop out into those things. They're going to also
be a dice, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That just amused me to no end. Speaking of things that are amusing.
Every time I let my balloon, I don't want to hold the balloon the whole time, but every time I put it down, it starts rolling around my desk.
Let me tell you, this is actually metal. Like, the sword is not real. It's not sharp, but it is a real-ish sword. It's pointy. I can't take this into PAX. Let me put it that way. I wasn't allowed to take this into PAX, but at some point I will probably take this off.
Yeah, man, I set the sword down. Dael, I think you can let it go.
Just don't follow it.
It just keeps...
This is good radio.
Yeah. Dante, maybe edit these for the audio version only. That's what I was going to say before. My eyes, you're just going to digitally put on Witcher eyes for me later, right? Perfect. All right, awesome. Speaking of Witcher eyes, some terribly sad news this week. Some just chronic news. You would think a celebrity died based on how much outcry there has been over this on Twitter. It's true. It's official. The king of the nerds themselves, Henry Cavill, he's hanging up his swords after season 3 of The Witcher, and they're casting Liam Hemsworth, so not even the good Hemsworth, as Geralt after that. I kid, Liam.
This news has made Ben mean.
I'm legitimately sad. Like, I did not expect to be. And the furor online, and for the record, I was not going to put this on the podcast run sheet either. I was like, that's not tabletop RPG news. It's got nothing to do with, like, Eldritch Lorecast and Dante.
To the Witcher Watch.
Yeah, exactly. Dante was like, no, you have to put this on there.
It's the most indulgent Witcher Watch yet. So
you're not to denial yet. You're still at anger. Is that what we're getting?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
right.
I look, I mean, to give this the mildest amount of seriousness for a second, I'm not one to get angry at castings. I'm old enough to remember when Heath Ledger was cast as the Joker, and everybody was real mad about that for a couple of weeks, and then look how that went. So I'm sure Liam Hemsworth will do a fantastic... I'm Geralt of Rivia. Oh, crikey, there's a big croc. I'm going to jump on it. However he approaches the role, I'm sure it'll be fine. But it is sad to see someone who was so incredibly passionate about it, get moved out of the role. And the conspiracy theories, there are so many conspiracy theories as to why Henry has left the role. It's actually low-key hilarious watching this unfold online.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just glad that you get to go through this, what we've been going through for years in geek fandom with with who was your first Doctor? Who's your favorite Doctor?
Right.
Who was your first Star Trek captain? Who was your favorite Star Trek captain? Who was your favorite Bond? Who was your first Bond? Now you get to play the who was your first Witcher? Yeah, who was your first Geralt? Who was your favorite? Because hopefully they'll have a new one every 2 or 3 years to really get the fandom riled up.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because people are going to hate watch, right? People are going to watch to do that, and in this sense, there is no bad publicity. So the more fire that gets put on to the more fuel that's added to the fire, the higher the ratings will be when the first episode comes out of season 4.
Well, it's also confusing because like season 3 is still yet to come and go. So there's going to be this weird, like, dare I say, grieving process in the fan base where it's like watching the last season with Henry knowing that he will not return. If it's really good, there's going to be a lot of really sad people. I mean, I've been dressed like this since I found out. This is not for Halloween. I just threw this on like to comfort myself, honestly.
I just want to read out the exact wording on the run sheet for today. It says Henry Cavill is out as Geralt. Liam Hemsworth is in. Was it the writers? Was it the money? Was it Superman? Why, Henry? Why? Sprouty face with a cry.
You fell for my trap card, Dael, because I deliberately put that on there knowing there was a good chance you'd read that out.
Yeah, you know what? That's fair.
Well, that's been your Witcher Watch for today. So speaking of horrifying things, let us crack into it. It is Halloween in certain areas of the world, not here anymore, but it is Halloween in America still, and therefore let us talk. This is just... Nobody emailed. This is just me picking a topic. James Hake, I want you to tell me of a monster type that legitimately scares you, and then we're like something that just gives you the heebie-jeebies. Might be spiders, might be snakes, might be ghosts, might be vampires. Who knows? Think of a monster concept or just even like an idea that legitimately scares you, and then we shall design it. And how you would do an encounter around that specific monster to try to make a horror-themed adventure.
How about shapeshifters?
Is this like someone who is fundamentally humanoid and like changes, or something that's like a creature that wears people's skin?
Yeah. Let's do the sort of classic pod people shapeshifters, where people are taken and the faces of those who you love are worn and impersonated by some alien intelligence.
Oh, that's a good clarification, because I was sitting here thinking I'm not that creeped out by any monsters, but the minute you said that, I remembered the Yerks from Animorphs.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything with a good sort of body horror like aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
When they appear somewhere, when they're like a changeling, if you will, to borrow a Fae term.
Is it something that's taken over their form, or is it something controlling them,
or have they been replaced? Have they been eaten up and consumed?
Now in fantasy
is it
drama,
safe to kill the villagers?
Yeah.
in fantasy drama, I love there's still some of them left, right? I love that, because then there's sort of a heroic moment where you can bring them back. I think in like raw alien horror, you want the person is dead, they have been eaten. But probably the characters wouldn't know. They wouldn't know yet. So there's probably some angst at the beginning of, well, that might still be them. They might still be inside. But then, you stab one of them, they melt into gray goo, and you're like, there is not a trace of my friend left.
Yeah, okay. I like this. I like the idea that like maybe they're infested by some sort of parasite. I'm thinking of like the crab people from Half-Life, the crab heads or something like that.
Crab people look like crab, taste like people.
Never heard that before.
The head crabs. Yeah, the Half-Life head crabs.
Yes. That's what I'm thinking of, is the head crabs. But
surely
maybe not
to set
quite.
This up, you'd have to have a key location, a town or a city or whatever, that the players come back to regularly, so that you just drip feed the changes slowly as they come back every time.
there's so many ways you could start with this. Like it could be a brain parasite, right? It could be kind of like the head crabs. The head crab zombies are really obvious, right? Because the head crab sits on top of them. They're all bloody
also eats
zombies.
the head.
They're not sort of what I'm thinking of so much, because those are just zombies at that point. But like some kind of brain worm that slithers in your ear and then grows in your cranium and starts puppeting you. Or maybe it's like an ooze that, like when you put Play-Doh on a newspaper, kind of takes a copy of who you are and then digests the rest.
You know what really creeps me out legitimately along these lines is the Last of Us zombies. The way that like their face just kind of, because I have like I don't know if there's like a specific phobia around like funguses like growing
Very
on the
much.
skin and
Yep.
that sort of thing.
Yep,
But
and maybe we should stop describing it quite so.
X card, let's all right. But what if
a great example of safety tools in use right there.
Safety tools.
Something like that, where there's like a subtle change somewhere, but you don't notice it immediately. And then here's the true horror, right? They start out, you're replacing them slow, like the whole village is being replaced slowly as the party come back. The party are being sent on quests, but what they find out is the quests they're being sent on by the villagers slowly change from being quests that aid the villagers to quests that aid the monster and its kind of like desire. But then you learn that something's going on because the villagers just start kind of like wigging out at random moments where they'll just be like perfectly normal. They'll be like, oh, you've come into my shop. Welcome. Help me, please. Was there anything that you can like, I can help you with that? You know, and there's just like moments of them coming out. And what you learn is you can save them, but you need a greater restoration spell, which is not a common spell with a lot of spell
false
slots.
Hydra in that idea.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Creepy.
Ben, I love the idea of like a shopkeeper being like talking with you normally and then without any change in attitude being like, can you help me with something, please? And be like, what? Can I help you with anything?
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that subtle.
The monster grimoire has the Blateworm, which is literally what we're all describing here. It's a creature. Now, it's used by warlocks to gain power in some cases, but it can also do exactly what we're talking about. And, you know, that's my thing. I was like Dael, no monster scares me, but the monsters that
I am fearless,
that affect reality, right? That affect your normal daily routine where things seem normal and then the shopkeeper starts acting strange, but then doesn't. You know, you come up on a situation that you think is one thing, and slowly as the game master, you can reveal that what you thought were two people having an intimate moment kissing, that's not what's happening here. And if you reveal that very slowly and you just change that expectation of what you see versus what's real, that's when you can really do some creeping out of people who are very difficult to creep out.
Shawn's like 10 steps ahead of us. We're like, what if this was the thing? Shawn's like, I wrote it.
Well, I can't say I wrote it, but it is written. It has been written.
It has been written.
So it is written, and so it has been put into a game, apparently.
When you say Shawn and Dael that like nothing frightens you, like there is not some like, how do you go with like, and you know, obviously I'm being a bit oblique there and saying like nothing frightens you, like in terms of like monsters, how do you go with like horror movies or like doesn't affect you, you're generally pretty good?
It's okay. So when I say that I'm not scared of the monster, I mean, I'm a total scaredy cat. I'm terrible with horror movies, although that's led to a bizarre fascination with horror movies, particularly zombie movies, because I used to be really freaked out by zombies, right? Like, but I'm at the point where like the monster itself rarely scares me. It's the other stuff. I hate jump scares. I'm fine with gore for the most part, but like nightmare fuel stuff, right? So one of the things that has scared me most in my sort of recent years was watching Twin Peaks for the first time. And when you first see, I mean, spoilers for Twin Peaks, I guess, when you first see Bob just sort of crouching behind the bed. And that freaked me all the way out. I was terrified of it, but it's not because I'm scared of Bob or ghosts or demons or whatever. I'm not scared of demons and ghosts. But
I'm scared of the concept of Bob in general.
I'm scared of the concept of Bob crouching behind my bed while I'm not looking. That's, you know, it's all the conceptual elements of it that I think spooks me. Weeping Angel style. I'm not necessarily scared of the Weeping Angels, but the fact that they move when you're not looking at them is terrifying. That's my thing.
Yeah, gotcha. Shawn, what about you? Is there something that gets under your skin? I need to know. I'm going to write these down. Just
the fear of the unknown is more. My imagination is much more terrifying than anything that is actually there.
Yeah,
and that's, as a game master, that's what you have to try to get at with the players. You can't put things in front of most players unless it's an X card situation, and they would be frightened. But you can let them frighten themselves.
Do you have an example of like how you've done this in play?
Let me pull my beard out of my mouth.
Yeah, I love how you're just battling with the beard there.
While Shawn's pulling his beard out of his mouth, one example that comes to mind is I wasn't actually there, but during PAX, a group of friends of ours were playing a game of 10 Candles, and the GM for that, the dreaded GM, Dread, was kind of just doing this thing where he would make noises and not explain them, right? So he would make the sound of shattering glass and not explain what was happening at all, and just let his players run with it and get freaked out and, start panicking and making assumptions about what that noise was. And that to me was such a light bulb moment of, oh, what a genius. What a great idea to just not explain things to your players.
Yeah, I can't think of a better example than that. Just make something happen, but take the agency away from the players that they're used to having, where they can just make a roll and know what's going on, or make a roll and have the answer. When they can't do that, it builds up that dread.
And I want to add to that, especially in a game like D&D, where you have a lot of power and you have a lot of control generally. There's a fine line as a GM you have to walk between the removal of control that creates horror and the removal of control that makes you feel like you are just watching a cutscene now. Because in a game like 10 Candles, where kind of the point from the very beginning is I'm going to get a little spooked out here, you're kind of already in the zone to have your agency removed away from you in a dramatic and interesting way. So there's a couple of things in a D&D-like game that you can do to make this work. You can, one, obviously sort of session zero this and be like, hey, I'm going to take away some of your control sometimes. Your ability to know things, your ability to do certain things for ways that will ramp up the tension. Are you okay with this? And if everyone's like yes, then you're like, great, cool, I will do that. But also the sort of tension that can get people in that game, right? The sound of shattering glass in the 10 Candles example. The reason why that is scary, one reason among many, is because that indicates that there is a dangerous threat beyond your ability to perceive somewhere else in the area. Something might come out of the shadows that is breaking all the windows, or actually in the case of this example, breaking all the light bulbs, because it was a monster that hates light. They figured out how to turn a backup generator on, and the monster is smashing all the light bulbs, which I love. That's great. But maybe in this sort of brainworms example that we've gone with in the D&D scene, in the D&D mode of this conversation, you have tracked the monsters down to their lair, and it's like this pit beneath the tavern cellar. And it is a gaping maw of earth that just kind of tunnels down and down and down out of view. Now, usually D&D characters are like, I don't need light. I've got dark vision and I can see perfectly out to 60 feet. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Then you don't even have to take their dark vision away. You can just say, as you go down, you can hear something skittering just out of the range of your dark vision. And every time you move forward to try and see it, it reacts automatically, as if anticipating your every movement, and stays just at the periphery of your black and white, dim, dark vision. Every now and then you can see a flash of movement slip right outside of the area of your sight. And that is enough to get them kind of on edge, because they know there's something there. They know there's something watching, and maybe it's spying, maybe it's waiting for the right moment, but you haven't even taken away any of their cool toys. You're just kind of playing with the limits of those toys.
In third edition, I helped run this interactive where many tables were playing the same event, and they were on the edge of this wilderness at a town festival that happens at night. And of course, they're attacked by undead creatures. Villagers are dragged off, including the son of the Viscount of the area. And so the characters are all running around fighting monsters, doing these things. And finally, they all come together after they've done their missions, and they find bags full of eyeballs. They see beyond that the son of the Viscount, who is not facing them. And that's all you need to say, right? People were screaming, no, oh my God, you don't need to describe what happens. And the son says, Father, is that you? I can't see. And that's all you need to do, right? You don't need to describe it. You don't need to get into horrible, gruesome detail. The players' imaginations are now doing it. You don't even have to say what happens after that. So, come up with situations like that, which aren't, if you describe that's X card worthy for a lot of people.
Sure.
But if you leave it at that, the players are going to do the work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's giving them just enough information and not enough information at the same time, right? It's the same trick as, creating anticipation in something like the game Dread, where you've got you're legally distinct from Jenga Tower. And
your Dread Tower.
Yeah. And at some point, it's going to fall, but you don't know when. You know it's going to fall, but you don't know when. Or, when I run Ghosts, I like to... I think this is the other thing, right? You can create anticipation. Something's going to happen, but I don't know when. That's, the same thing as the trick that we've talked about before, where you track the hit points instead of the players, which makes it scary because they know that they're losing hit points, but they don't know how close they are. Takes away a little bit of that information. So you've got the anticipation end of things, or on the other end, you've got the removal of agency, where it's like something's happening, but you can't confront it the way that you usually would. You want to react to it, but you can't react to it following your instinct, right? So if you are trapped in a haunted house, I love not having the ghost manifest for the first half of the encounter, right? Ghostly things are happening. There's enough information here to know that there is a ghost, but you can't fight it. Because the ghost doesn't have a shape yet. It's just a scary house. And how are you going to fight the scary house? You know what I mean? So those little neat tricks where you're just like, something's happening. What you got to do about it?
This conversation has kind of made me go back and really think about. There was something in the chat earlier. I'd have to scroll up to find it, but also something that Shawn and Dael, you were both saying before. Dael, where you were like, I'm not scared of demons, or I'm not scared of like X thing, but more the thought of how it's presented. And it made me reflect on like why, like, ghosts terrify me, right? That would be the instant answer to this question. And yet they also kind of fascinate me in that same, like, I'm terrible at horror movies, but love the concept of ghosts sort of thing. And I'm thinking of Haunting of Hill House, which is an excellent series.
Ooh.
If you're scared of ghosts. I haven't watched Bly Manor yet because I basically just lived a week and a half in high anxiety all the time during the time I watched Haunting of Hill House. I wasn't sleeping. It was legitimately terrible. But what I was thinking about as you were talking was like, why did that scare me so much? And I think it's because, particularly as presented with ghosts, especially if it's like in the house, in a haunting, it's in your safe space. But you also, like, as the kids in that show, can't escape. There's no way to get out of the house because it's dark outside. It would be dangerous to get out of your bed and wander around. And even in your bed, you're not safe because, they can float up and still be hanging out around you or whatever. And so, I slept with the anxiety that, like, I've got my eyes closed, I'm in my own bed, but I could open my eyes at any moment and there'd be some creepy corpse, ghosty person just like leering down at me. Terrible, horrifying. And so how to translate that into like a role-playing game could be something as simple as like not flag posting too much that they're like, let the players know they're playing a horror campaign, right? But I think as you said, Dael, they don't know when the terrible thing's going to happen. So don't make it obvious, when they get to the village, in their brain, they're like, oh, the village is a safe space. And now they've got to go out into the wilderness to a cave. And it's like, oh, okay, we're out here in this cave. Is this where the horror's going to strike? It's a bunch of goblins. It's like something fairly normal. Okay, we come back to the village. Well, now we're back in this safe space. All right, now you've got to go fight a werewolf. And they're like, okay, is this where the horror is going to take place? Okay, that was mildly, it was gothic horror, not really like terrifying horror. Come back to the village. But then as we've been discussing, the village gets more and more strange, gets more unsafe, gets weirder, to the point where the party feel like they have no safe haven anymore. And you're kind of like done just a hopefully gentle enough but subtle enough rug pull that now they feel like they're in a situation they can't escape from and they have to deal with it. They have to focus on what's happening around them.
You know what? You saying that, I've never tried this, but now I would like to try it. So I have a habit of the background music I play when the players are in town is just sort of like post-modern jukebox, like vitamin string quartet sort of instrumental versions of pop songs that are just a little bit difficult to recognize immediately what song it is, but it is a familiar song. So it's a little bit like, you walk into the shops and you hear, the top 100 playing in the background, right? I want it to be that thing of this place feels more familiar rather than the rest of the time I like to play music that the players don't really recognize. So they don't get in their head about it. But it would be really fun to do this kind of a setup and just at some point start playing unfamiliar music in town and see if that has any effect. Like people I've known people who play sort of low droning sort of soundscapes in the background of their scary games and at a dramatic point stop playing it, but they play it really, really quietly. So there's just something missing suddenly.
Right.
And it just makes everyone kind of go, something's wrong. I don't know. I would love to do that kind of little sneaky thing in the background.
Oh, there's a great first edition AD&D adventure called Against the Cult of the Reptile God. And it's one of the first adventures
talks about it
where
all the time.
Yeah, it's one of the first adventures where the real danger isn't actually in the dungeon, it's in the town. So if you are running a game like that, it's a great example of a way to make the town spooky and make the town more dangerous. So the players, well, I'm going to run off to the tavern to do this, and that character is never seen again. That's what happened to my character in that adventure when I played it a long, long, long time ago. Now that was scary because it was completely not what anyone at the table expected.
This is unrelated-ish. Dael, you were talking about droning music. I was at Big Bad Con this weekend, and one of the things we did was Spencer Stark, who wrote Alice is Missing, a cool and sort of immersive role-playing game, was running a game of Blood on the Clock Tower, which is a hidden role social deduction game set in sort of gothic realm. I call it Bloodborne Werewolf, basically. And this was a huge 20-person game. It was midnight on the second day of the con. This game was not completed, but in the background, as the first night and the opening days were happening, there was this sort of low, droning, dark ambience going on in the background. And all of a sudden, with no warning, this blaring klaxon was roaring out. And we were like, holy crap, what is happening? Turns out the hotel fire alarm started going. But were that an intentional moment? What a moment it would have been. So everyone jumped. Nice. Yeah, the game fell apart after we had to evacuate for the fire.
Yeah, I
alarm,
can imagine it would. I can imagine it would. But actually, I mean, if you look at Alice is Missing as well, I mean, spoilers for anyone who hasn't played Alice is Missing, avert your ears for a moment because that's possible. But there's a turn in the game where some big dramatic thing happens. And you don't know what it might be because it's semi-randomized, but a building could burn down suddenly. There could be a huge blackout that changes, like you actually have to turn off the lights and pull out a torch. There's a snowstorm. Any number of things happen at this sort of critical point in the game that suddenly changes things and makes the stakes feel huge. So I'm just saying I wouldn't put past Spencer to do something like that.
Yeah, I thought that's what I was going to say.
Now that it's happened accidentally, I'm expecting it to happen deliberately.
He's like, that is a great mechanic. I need to put that in there.
We made a joke afterward. He was talking about like, you know what, James, the thing that happened here is that Blood on the Clock Tower, the way I play it, the whole point of the game is to stretch out tension as long as possible and then have a very sudden release that induces terror and then return to the growing tension and then sudden release and so on and so on, and to kind of space it out more and more frequently. And really all that fire alarm did was help us speed run that whole process. To which I say, you're right, Spencer. We should stop being game designers. We should start becoming fire alarm designers. And I think game designers should take this to heart. Become a fire alarm designer in some way or another.
Well, I was going to ask before, because we've been talking about sound and sort of, 3D, four-dimensional kind of effects that you can use when running your game to have influence over how your players feel. And I don't know if this is a thing or not, so this question might go nowhere. But, has anybody here really gone all in running, like, a Halloween game where you've got costumes, you've got music, you almost set your living room up or your dining room up like it's a horror house or something like that? Like, what are some go-to things that you have done or perhaps would do to try to set up that sort of experience for your players, regardless of what system you're running?
The last time I did that, I was running Ravenloft pre-Curse of Strahd in 5e. I converted the AD&D module to 5e, and I was in my college dorm. So what I'll say is I did my best, but I don't really have any good advice for in a space that you can really control.
Yeah, I haven't for years and years and years, and even when I did, it didn't go according to plan because the players were never quite ready to fully buy into the whole concept. You can do a lot of the things we talked about. Make the players paranoid for their characters. If we get outside of the more esoteric things and get to the game design part, make the characters paranoid by saying, in this adventure, one of you is a serial killer, and now we're just going to play. And maybe none of them are, but strange things are happening around them. So it makes the other characters think that they are or are not with a killer. Little things like that can help take even the most jaded of us and make it at least suspenseful, if not downright terrifying.
I don't think that I've ever done it for D&D, which is a shame because I should. Now I'm thinking about it a lot. I'm like, what could I do with the lighting? Intriguing. But I'm trying to think of other situations. I do think I've dabbled with it in other places, right? So when I played Alice is Missing, we set it all up as well as we could to be appropriately, timed and spaced, I guess. And we all dressed as the characters that we wanted to play as. And then, I've particularly board games that are legacy board games, for a while, that was the big thing was let's take a board game and we'll just make a campaign out of it. So I spent the entirety of playing the Pandemic Legacy Edition, just dressing as a scientist. There are photos of me. I've got my lab coat and I've got these glasses on, and I'm very like, ooh, yes, severe scientist character from the movie. So I've done those things. So it's wild to me that I haven't done that for a D&D Halloween adventure. I suppose I've probably not really run an actual D&D Halloween adventure. I've run scary sessions from time to time,
sure,
but maybe not planned.
So when I was first running, just remembered this. One thing I did use when I was trying to evoke a scary mood, either for a Halloween session or some other session, is I grabbed recordings from numbers stations, which are basically World War I and later era shortwave radio frequencies that relay coded transmissions of some sort using numbers or Morse code or something. And often, especially like the spooky ones are the Russian ones, is basically what the common wisdom is. But if you go on YouTube and you search for spooky numbers station or something like that, you will get some very sort of weird ambient tracks that will occasionally be punctuated by a voice speaking in a very sort of dolorous tone. 1976. And if you kind of just keep that quiet in the background so that the actual speaking isn't even really intelligible, it's perceptible, but it's not intelligible, that adds this weird sort of like outsider looking in quality to the stuff you're doing, especially if there's kind of a droning ambient track playing along with it.
This is off this topic maybe a little bit, but something Shawn said made me want to bring it up. So Shawn mentioned when your players aren't like necessarily willing to go along with the scary, right? And I think that it is worth talking about when you're trying to run a scary game and all your players are cracking jokes, right? Because that can be hard, and that is a genuine human instinct, right? What are some weird things that humans do when they're afraid? They sing, for starters. They pick whatever random song is closest in their brain and they start humming. And then on top of that, you've got the thing that I certainly am guilty of because I'm so, spooked by horror movies, that I'll sit there and I'll pick it apart and I'll make fun of the horror movie, right? It's like, oh, well, this isn't scary because, and you find reasons for it to not be scary. And it is this kind of common human instinct to make fun of the thing so that it's not scary, which is not what you want when you're trying to run a scary game. But I will say, in my limited experience, and hopefully some other people from our esteemed panelists here have some advice, but in my experience, if you can try and control, I'm trying to say can try and control, and it's making it difficult. If you can try to control the tension a little bit and let your players relieve that valve every now and then, right? Some of my most successful scary sessions have involved the players coming up for air and cracking a joke about it being scary, and then you pull them back into it. So you let them have that little release so that they don't get too tense and it starts breaking out the other side. Does that make sense? You let them have that little bit and then dive back into it, and you can try and sort of keep them from getting too far down that path, just by letting them. I think it sounds counterintuitive to be like, let them make jokes, but if you let them make some jokes, then you can kind of.
No, I agree completely, because it's very similar running like a dark fantasy campaign or anything that's meant to have some modicum of groundedness or authenticity in the emotional truth of the game that you're playing, which is a very like actorly drama sentence, but drawing on that background a lot. The reason a lot of young actors struggle is because being vulnerable is counterintuitive to almost like your human instinct, right? Like it is hard to be vulnerable around other people. And it is, I'm sure there's some evolutionary reason of like, if you're vulnerable, you die as a, organism or whatever. But like, it's hard to show genuine sadness. It's hard to show genuine anger. Anger's an easier emotion to play than sadness because anger has power behind it, or it can appear to seize power. And when people are wanting to play a game, even if they're wanting to invest in the emotional honesty of the scene that's playing out, their instinct is to rail against it and crack a joke and make light of the situation because it's a protective measure, to protect them from, being scared, but it also might just be protection against like feeling foolish, in the scene. You don't want to play scared or play act being scared and then everybody thinks that you're overdoing it or, any sort of thing that pops into your head like that. And so it's why like every D&D game has that reputation, that meme of like you set out as the Fellowship of the Ring, which is not even like horror, right? Like that's just epic fantasy, but you all end up as Monty Python and Search for the Holy Grail because just through that natural desire to keep the game fun and light and not wanting to invest too much in the emotional vulnerability, whether it's sadness, anger, whatever it happens to be. There's jealousy, envy, is much easier to kind of, and that's why a lot of D&D games end up over in that Monty Python camp. So I often far oversell how dark and gritty and gruesome and violent and horrible the games I'm running are going to be, not because they're going to have no humor behind them, not because they're not going to have moments of levity and fun and joy, but because if you kind of don't oversell it to at least some degree, or you don't make it, maybe not oversell it, but you don't make it very clear to the players that this is the sort of game you want to run, then naturally it will pull itself back towards that more Python-esque style of game. And so if you're like, all right, this is going to be dark, and naturally players are just going to want to, pull it back to those moments of levity. And that's fine. Exactly as you were saying, Dael, like as long as they're willing to buy into the reality of the situation at the appropriate moment, it's not that a dark fantasy or a horror game can't have any humor. It should, as you said, to allow for that levity. A lot of horror shows, a lot of horror movies are also very funny, at times. Sometimes unintentionally so, but sometimes very, very intentionally so.
And you can totally lean into that in your horror game. You can say we are going to play a horror game, but it's going to be campy, or it's going to be a little bit on the silly side. You could Shaun of the Dead this game, and then the horror will actually hit harder when it hits.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's that juxtaposition will even give more impetus to the horror than it would if you tried to be serious about it.
I think something that James said to me, I don't remember when you said this. I feel like it might have even been like last Halloween on the podcast. I was asking a question, something along the lines of like, what is specific to Halloween rather than just general horror, and your answer was that Halloween has a campiness to it. Halloween is pumpkin heads and tacky decorations and stuff like that, as opposed to like more generic horror tries more legitimately to be like frightening in some way. I don't know. Feel free to elaborate if I'm slightly misrepresenting that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely it. It's pumpkin heads and skeleton masks. And I think the best way for horror to play in that Halloween space is to play with the sort of obfuscation of identity, right? What could be lurking behind that mask? What happens when the campy and the ritual, the sort of foolishly ritual, becomes the bloodily ritual or the actual? When does the artifice become real is the sort of horror that you can play in with Halloween. I think that's very fun.
The comedy can even come through like in a moment of genuine horror. I'm just thinking of Aliens, when he's like, game over, man, game over. Like that's hilarious. But he's saying that because he's so wiped out with fear, that like he knows he's done. Like there's nothing, there's no, they're done for. Anyway, that just popped into my head, and it's like, yeah, you can an example of like when it is horrifying and hilarious at the same time. Those things live very hand in hand.
Yeah, well, Jay Pizza Beats just brought up in chat that there is room for in-character jokes as well. Like you can make an intentionally unfunny joke in character to show that your player is trying to play off being afraid.
Yeah. There's something that the D&D designers talked about is where like there is a school of design philosophy where you don't write comedy into the adventure because the players will do that for you. You don't write, Bob Wiggleshorts or whatever as an NPC name, because surely Bob Wiggleshorts, the NPC, will come up by the players renaming one of them, right? To take the adventure zones as an example, Forgotten Realms, the NPC Sildar Hallwinter, within seconds of being met by the player characters, became Berry Blue Jeans, right? And it stayed that way for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah. Is it alliteration? Is that what I'm thinking of? No. Something when it sounds like the same word is just the bane of dungeon masters and the friend of players, of just like, oh, I remember this guy because his name sounds like lasagna or like, whatever.
Yeah.
I am Farron Ellen.
Best friend
watermelon.
Lasagna. Yeah,
exactly.
It's also interesting. We've got some really great stuff going on in the chat today. Sorry, I'm just bringing up some of it that I've seen. There was also talk about the idea that a game like Dread gives you a tool to let your players lean into that vulnerability that you were talking about, Ben, right? Like it gives everyone something to be genuinely worried about. This tower is going to fall down. We're all tense about it. And for the most part, I mean, you might get some wang rods here and there who are like, it's going to be really funny if I kick over the tower. But for the most part, if you've sat down to...
It's a Machiavellism.
if you've sat down to play Dread, buying into that social contract, we're going to play this scary game now. For the most part, people are going to use that as a tool to access that fear and let themselves, be afraid in the moment. And it is interesting thinking about these other games. Alice is Missing, although it's maybe less horror, but there are these other games, 10 Candles, Alice is Missing, Dread, that give you a specific tool, like a countdown clock or the candles going out, to give you a specific point to focus on that sort of accesses that fear for the actual players. And for D&D, the tricky thing is you have to create that. You have to find a separate thing to be that, because it's not baked into the rules.
Grim Hollow introduces like the extended long rest mechanic, which means that players can get a bit more desperate between encounters and monsters become legitimately frightening again, because the players can't just supernova every encounter. They, like, on the third day, they haven't long rested yet because they haven't had the chance to settle in town, and they've got some monster in the woods that's actively hunting them. They, in a normal game of D&D, they know, yeah, come at me. I've got spell slots for days. But we fought the X monster, and there were the bandits that we ran across on the road earlier, and I used a spell to get past this puzzle, blah, blah, blah. Now we're struggling. Like, this is actually kind of goes into very quickly, we might tackle the email question, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com if you want to email us. Lars, who was asking about, I'm going to actually use Shawn's answer to say what he was asking about, was the latency or lag in tabletop RPGs when more complexity comes into it. Just emailed us again to ask about like 5e auto homebrew rules that you introduce at the start of every one of your campaigns, maybe just dropping the Halloween flavor on that. Do the three of you have homebrew or third-party rules that you introduce to your games to try to capture that tension? Let me pull up my notes
from my most recent session 0, where at the bottom of it, there's a conversation about what am I automatically on. So I have opt out and opt in homebrew things for any given game. So I've got my ones that I'm like, I would like to run the game with this. I think that would make it interesting and fun for me. But if you really don't like the sound of it, we can talk about it and get rid of it, So you can opt out of any of these, but those are Wisdom Initiative, which is just you can choose whether you add Dex or Wisdom to your initiative roll, because I like the idea that there are people who can just see the tension rising and like ready for the fight to break out, right? So that's your Wisdom Initiative. I have some tweaks to death save damage that's complicated but boring, so I won't go into it. I make people roll death saves without telling anyone whether they failed or succeeded. And my passive perception is 7 plus perception bonus instead of 10 plus perception bonus, because I want it to actually feel passive.
Yes.
And then, thank you. And then I've got my opt-in ones, which aren't automatically turned on, but people, if they like the sound of them, can use them. So click traps, which is traps that activate when you say click, and people have like one moment to react and do something, and it changes kind of whether the trap hits or not. Major injuries, which I've got several videos on actually, which is very dramatic, but I think that a lot of players like the idea of, after a big battle where they got hit hard, they like to have a scar afterwards. So that's what that's all about. And then I make resurrection a little bit harder. And then the last one has a terrible name. It's called Awake Points, which is just that while you are unconscious, you also have 0 hit points. So by that, I mean, if you're asleep, you are also at 0 hit points. That it enables room for, sneaky assassinations or whatever, that sort of thing.
What happens if you get stabbed and then you wake up?
You are making death saves. So it's kind of that thing of like, if you're at 0 and you take damage, you have to make death saving throws. So that's how I handle that anyway.
Okay, cool.
But it's called Awake Points because of a stupid Twitter thread I had once.
No, I like it. It works. It communicates.
That's my list.
Well, my campaign has been really sort of by the book lately, because I had it in mind that I was like, I'm going to make sure that I'm playing D&D in the way that I would be writing for it, which is a non-homebrewed system. And to be honest, I'm getting kind of tired of it. So I think when my campaign comes back from hiatus, I'm going to get a little wilder and a little woollier with my rules, but I haven't really decided on what yet.
I'm the same as James. I try to play by the book, especially if you're playtesting. I have used some of the optional Grim Hollow stuff, including like the beast pool. But that's not an automatic thing. The only thing that's automatic for me, I don't know if this counts as homebrew, but we're always leveling based on story. There are no experience points. We're not going to worry about encumbrance unless you're trying to carry something much, much larger and it's important to the story. That's the sort of thing that my home game looks like.
I have a love-hate with encumbrance because I like it conceptually. It adds, I think, a lot of fidelity, but it just seems like a chronically unpopular, not even just in role-playing games, but in like video games as well, a chronically unpopular mechanic that I can understand why folks hate it so much.
Yeah, I have really clear memories of my brother playing Skyrim for the first time and refusing to drop any of the pots and pans he'd collected. So he gets out of the tutorial dungeon and just crawls his way to the wrong town, mind you. Because you've got the nearby town. He goes all the way to the next. He went so far. He went to like Falkreath or something. It was...
Jeez. It's just every time I think about it, I think of a player saying like, yeah, I've got my battle axe, my longsword, my silver dagger, my crossbow, my longbow. It just reminds me of like a joke from the Curse of Monkey Island where Guybrush grabs like a long pole with like a hook on the end of it. I'm sure it's got some official boating term, but he takes it off the wall, opens his trousers, just drops it in, and then it just disappears. And like, yeah, it's in your inventory now. That's all I think of when I think of encumbrance.
Do you have a laundry list of house rules that you use, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, again, similar to Shawn, I'm not sure if they necessarily count as house rules. I level up on never. That's my house rule. You never level up. No, I level up on milestone. As James found out. Level up on milestone. I don't use flanking because I find the game and combat just becomes all about flanking. I'm using a lot of the Grimhollow homebrew rules, like the Beast and Resolve pool at the moment, the long rests, the injury mechanics. I do change how exhaustion works. I think I've talked about this before, where it's a D4 on all checks instead of disadvantage, like minus from all checks instead of disadvantage, which then evolves to a D6 to a D8, etc. as you get more exhaustion. But I'm thinking of just swapping to the 1 D&D exhaustion because I like that.
Exhaustion is pretty good. It's just so simple.
So good.
And you can be so liberal with it. You can have so many things cause exhaustion because it's not going to immediately kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it, and which it introduces
exhausted punks.
Yeah.
I'm going to say.
Who was it who told me? I can't remember if it was on this podcast or whether it was somewhere else, but somebody told me that they have their vampire. They were running Curse of Strahd and their vampires inflict exhaustion. So you take the necrotic damage plus the health drain and you take a level of exhaustion, which I thought was genius. Sounds brutal under 5e base exhaustion rules, but actually I think works really well under the 1 D&D exhaustion rules.
Yeah. The major injuries that I talked about just a second ago, in the video where I talk about that, I give players exhaustion after they've gotten a major injury. And lots of people in the comments were like, how could you do that? They're going to die. And I'm like, but there's nothing in the books that actually gives you exhaustion. There's so few things that give you exhaustion because it's so deadly. So I was very willing to be liberal, and now no one can call me on it.
No. Even like it's too hot, you're out in the desert, exhaustion, it's too cold, players just go, I pull on a woolly jacket, I'm fine.
Yeah.
They hate it. They hate exhaustion, I say as a generalization. Speaking of generalizations, this podcast will generally be around week after week for at least the next little while, but it is ending right now. So if you want to ask a question like Lars did, you can email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, and I will read your email and present it to the panel. Thank you, James, for the wonderful suggestion for us to all dress up. This was a lot of fun getting in chat and seeing everybody's costume. I've been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, and we will see you again next week. Everybody posing for like a moment as we wait for the end credits to
and freeze frame.
Yeah. And done.
Guess I'm Gotta make it up. Oh no, hat hair.
Everybody, throw your.
Oh God, wig hair.